And we're just having Major Horabin wired for sound, which he wasn't before. Good morning and welcome, Major.
Good morning to you.
What is your background, your military rank? Were you a Guards officer?
As a Major, Director of Music in primarily the Irish Guards. And latterly, the last 4 years of my career, I was Senior Director of Music with the Guards Division in London, responsible for organising the music for state occasions, visits of VIPs from other countries, and, of course, particularly the Queen's birthday parade, the Trooping of the Colour.
As a musical director of a Guards regiment, obviously you were involved primarily with brass and silver military music. But how broad does your musical spectrum, in fact, have to be in order to do what you do now and what you have done in the past?
Well, of course, primarily, the object of the Guards band is for marching guardsmen on parade. But
Right.
then there are other facets, of course, to running an orchestra, string orchestra for state occasions. Now, the musicians themselves not only participate in state music and ceremonial, but they also play in theatres in London. There are some string players, the woodwind players, they do deputy desks in orchestras in London. And, of course, other civilian-type engagements. Another facet, of course, and they're pretty hot into, is the big band scene. And quite a lot of the musicians, particularly the brass players, are playing in big bands, organisations in London, jazz side of things.
Wow.
It's a wider spectrum.
Major, you're here in South Africa. What is the purpose of your visit?
Primarily to participate in the British element of the International Carnival. I was invited over here by Pat Corbin of the Chamber of Commerce, who in fact was the founding member of the Johannesburg City Brass Band, which is making great strides in such a short time, in 2 years. So it's a super feat, quite unique, and it's about time you had your own band, and I hope it long lasts.
And talking of standards, how do we compare? I mean, you come from Britain now, you've seen a lot, you've heard a lot. From what you've seen here, and from your experience, how do we compare?
There is a long way to go, particularly, and I think the vital reason, I must say this, of course, music education in schools is the foundation for this type of culture. And I think it needs an enormous amount of effort to get this going at the moment. I think the start has been made, but there is a long way to go. After all, in our country, of course, it's taken now 25, 30 years to get the music education in our schools since the war up to the standard it is now. And it's quite excellent. I would compare with anywhere in the world. I'm very proud of it.
Major, you've been associated for a number of years with Boozy and Hawkes in terms of the supply of musical instruments. Britain has had a long history up, especially amongst the working class areas of the North and the Midlands,
Yes.
of every mine, every colliery, every factory having a marvellous brass band. Is the supply of expensive, I say expensive advisedly, instruments still there, or is it expensive?
It is expensive. The materials, of course, are very, very costly. The process of making them, there's still an enormous amount of craftsmanship going into the making these instruments, and a lot of research. And that they are expensive commensurately with some other countries.
Is that part of the problem here, would you say?
Yes. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, of course, that the Boozy and Hawkes brass instrument particularly is probably about the best in the world.
The standard's still high.
Its quality is high and it's durable. And that's how it all built into the price of the instruments. I think there's a problem here at the moment, of course, with the exchange rate. And hopefully in the not too distant future that's going to change. It's tough for Boozy and Hawkes at the moment to try and export.
Is there any way of short-circuiting this, getting around this problem?
Only by making one's own instruments, but I'm not sure that
Which one doesn't just set up overnight?
No, it takes many years of research, generally.
Major, does Britain produce more ceremonial music than any other country in the world? It seems it's...
I've not done any research in it, but I suspect so, because nearly every day in London something happens. If only the change of the guard at the palace, that starts the day. But certainly, once or twice a week, there is somebody coming from another country for which a ceremonial is provided. And of course, there's a thriving situation in the concert halls in the evenings. We constantly play in the Albert Hall and places like that, right. Mass bands. It's quite pulsating.
It must be very exciting to be involved in an ongoing musical milieu that Whereas so often classical music is just something that one plays on the odd record. It's very much alive, isn't it,
Yes.
in Britain? And there are jobbing musicians heavily involved in all fields.
Yes, very much so. You mentioned before, of course, about the brass band situation. It's particularly, as a comparison here, when you look at the mining situation here. After all, our brass bands only started in the mid-19th century because they had nothing else to do. And the mine owners thought this would be a good kind of recreation facility for them. And that's how it took off. Some of these people actually played instruments, but they couldn't read or write.
Amazing.
And the longer term, of course, now we've got over 10,000 bands of various standards in UK and have an annual contest, which is, of course, internationally famous.
Just the one big contest, or presumably there are lots of minor ones?
There are
going
regional
on?
contests leading up to the finals, which take place, I think, next month in the Albert Hall in London. And at that time, I think it's the last 14 or 15 bands out of the 10,000 will be there.
To what extent are you consulted by members of the royal family if you are director of music at, say, Buckingham Palace? How musically conscious are the royal family in general?
Well,
or let's say educated? Are they pretty musical as a general rule?
Yes, Queen Mother particularly, Prince Charles most definitely. The Queen herself has a good appreciation. I wouldn't say she ranks along with her mother in her musical taste, appreciation, but nonetheless, she's very, very critical of the music. For example, in state occasions, state banquets or investitures, she knows what is right and wrong. And she's probably the most experienced professional, of course, in the royal household, this kind of thing, since 1953.
What about playing musicians, members of the royal family?
Prince Charles, I'm not sure whether he still plays the cello, but he did. The Queen Mother, I believe, used to play the pianoforte. I'm not sure what the rest do, actually. They mostly ride horses.
Major, please tell our viewers about your connection with Buckingham Palace. When did you actually start there?
Oh, goodness me, in the early 60s, when I joined the Guards.
Yes.
Now, all the directors, there are 7 bands in the household division. There are 2 household cavalry bands, mounted bands, and 5 foot guards.
Right.
I was the director of music of the Irish Guards, and our day-to-day routine, we all compare, doing the change in the guard, or maybe we're away doing a tour of America. For example, I did a 12-week tour of America, 78 cities, constantly on the go.
Takes you away.
7-week tour of Japan, all those facets and that. But your primary function is the royal household and the monarch, and her wishes come first.
Major, it's absolutely fascinating talking about it. I'd like to talk a lot more, but time does not allow. Thank you for coming in, and
Thank you very much.
enjoy your stay. And
Thanks for inviting me.
thank you. And I